Welcome to the part 2 of this tutorial series on how to make a VR multiplayer game in Unity. So in last episode we learned how to create an avatar for each person playing your game and synchronize the hands position to see ourselves in the game. And so you guys had some great suggestions that I want to address in this video. So I will show you here how you can synchronize the hands animation, how multiple players can interact with the same object, and finally how to speak to the other player using Photon voice. Are you guys ready? So let's get started. And by the way, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel to not miss the next video. You can also support the channel on my Patreon, where I will make an extra VR multiplayer tutorial for the one who want to know more. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we are back where we were at the end of last episode. As you can see, we have here our XR rig, which will create the VR camera that we will use. And then we have the network manager that is responsible to connect to the server and spawn the network player here with the network player spawner. And for the prefab that we are spawning with the script, it is here in resources network player. So before continuing with this video, I want to fix an issue that I made in the last episode. So if we go here in the network player script and that we open it. So as you can see here in the map position function, we use common usage.device position and common usage.device rotation to move and rotate the ends and the head of our avatar network player. But this causes an issue because these two values are local, so which means if the XR rig will move, the network avatar will not move. So let me show you a quick way that we can fix this. First of all, I will create here 3 private transform variables, one called head rig, then left hand rig, and finally right hand rig. Perfect. And the idea is to set these 3 elements to be, if we go back to our scene, we want to set this variable to be here the main camera, the left hand controller, and the right hand controller. So to do so, I will go in the start function, and I want here at the top add using Unity engine.xr.interaction.toolkit, and I want to find the XR rig by using XR rig equals find objects of type XR rig. So this way we will have access here on our XR rig. Then I want to access the head and the left hand. So we can do rig.transform.find, and then we will find the child by the name. So to do so, we need to put here the path to our child. So in our case, we need to first use camera offset here. So let me just copy and paste the name of this game object here, and then slash, and then the name of the head, so the main camera in our case. And there you go. This way we will access here the transform variable of our main camera, and we can store it in our head rig transform variable. And there you go. Now we can do exactly the same, but this time for the left hand. So left hand rig equals rig.transform.find camera offset slash, and here the name is for the left hand controller, left hand controller. So let me copy and paste this over there, and perfect once and for all for the right hand. And so I'm going to copy this line and put here right hand controller instead. And basically this way we've set our 3 variables to be the main camera transform, the left hand transform, and the right hand transform. So we'll be able to access them at all time. And so here, instead of using input devices, I can remove these 2 lines. Instead of XR node, I will do transform rig transform. And now we can set here target position to be the rig transform.position, and then rig transform.rotation for the rotation of our target. This way it will use the world coordinate and not the local one. And now in the map function that we are calling in the update function, we can simply put here as the second parameter for the head rig, then the left hand rig, and finally the right hand rig. And basically That's it. Now, by doing so, using world position, we are able to move in the best way possible. So let me just show you quickly how it looks by building our game. So I will here go to File, Build and Run. Okay, so as you can see, I have one application running here. And now if we go in the Unity editor and that we click on Play, and now, as you can see, we have two avatar spawn for each one of the client of the server, so myself and the other application. Now here, if I move here the XR rig for some reason, so if I put it maybe in front of the other player and rotate it like so, so this way the XR rig is facing the other player. Now, if we go on the other application, you can see that indeed we are able to see the other player and that he has moved correctly. So now we have no more issue with the positioning of the two avatars. Okay, so this was for the easy fix. So now we are able to move with the XR rig and the avatar will move correctly. I want to show you how to synchronize the hands animation that we are using. Okay, so for the animation of our player, let me go here in Resources, Network Player, and double click on it. And if you remember correctly, we use for the left hand and the right hand, the custom left hand model and the custom right hand model, which both have a pre-made left hand animator that I made in the second part of my tutorial series on how to make a VR game. So if you haven't already, go watch this video to know how I made this animator. But now if we go to the animator panel, which we can access by going here, Windows, Animation, Animator, you can see that two parameters are responsible to trigger the animation of the left hand. And so if we go here on the blend tree and that I click on blend tree, you can see that if I change this value, we can have a fist or we can pinch. And so this is basically the two values that we use to animate the hands. So now what we want to do is use these two values inside the network player script to animate the network hand. So first thing first, I want here to go to script and click on end presence here. And so here is the end present script that I'm using to animate the hands of the player and that we made in the second part of my tutorial series on how to make a VR game in Unity. And as you can see, we have a function in the script called update and animation, which will get the trigger value also with the grip value and will animate the hands accordingly. So to animate the network hand, I'm going to simply copy this function and go in the network player script. And then what I'm going to do is add here this function over there. So update and animation and copy it in the network player script. Now this script needs two things, the target device and the end animator. So I'm going to add them as a local variable. So input device, target device. And for the other one, it's an end animator. So an animator that I will call end animator. Perfect. And now we have no more error in this function. And now what's left for us to do is call this update and animation with the end that we want and the target device that we want. So for the end animator, we can go here and under the right hand, we can create two public animator value. So one for left hand animator and the other one for the right hand animator. Perfect. And now if Photon view is mine, we can update the end animation of the left hand. So we can get the input device with input devices with an S here, dot get device at XR node and give here the XR node dot left hand and then the left hand animator. Perfect. And now we will do exactly the same, but this time for the right hand with XR node dot right hand and with the right hand animator. Perfect, we are now animating the end of the network player, but it's not it. If we want to send the animation that we are triggering here, we need to add a Photon view animator to our animator. So I'm going to go back to the Unity project. We can select both the custom left hand model and the custom right hand model. I'm going to click on add component and search for Photon animator view. Perfect. So what this does is add the Photon animator view component. So as you can see, it automatically creates component for the layer 0 weight and for our two parameters that we are using to animate the ends. We don't want to synchronize the weight of the layer, so we can leave it to disable. But we want to synchronize the grip, so I will set it to maybe continuous. And the same goes for trigger. And we can do this also for the custom right hand model. And there you go, now this will synchronize the grip and trigger parameter over all network. And so before closing this, make sure that the Photon animator view is used in the Photon view of our network player. So if we click here on network player, you can see that automatically these two are added, and so we are now good to go. Oh, and I almost forgot the most important. We need to drag also the animator of both hand here in the network player script. So I'm going to drag here the custom left hand model over there and the custom right hand model over there. And there you go, we are now ready. And now if you go to our scene and that we build our game, as you can see, the end animation doesn't synchronize over the network. But why? And I admit that this took me a long time to figure it out, and it's a dumb mistake that I made, so let me show you how to make it work once and for all. So if we go back to the network player script, as you can see in the update function, in the previous episode we disabled the right hand game object, the left hand game object, but also the head game object. And this is a mistake because it also disables the animation of the hands. And so instead of doing this here, what we can do is remove these three lines and disable instead the renderer in the start function. So let me write for each. Let's double press the tab button to autocomplete this loop. And instead of collection, we can write get component with an S in children and search for the renderer. And there you go. Now this will create a list of all the renderer in the children of this game object. And so what we want to do is instead of deactivate the game object, we want to simply disable the renderer. And so obviously we only want to do this if the Photon view is mine. Perfect. And there you go, we are now correctly hiding the game object if it's the game object that we are controlling. And now, as you can see, if we build once again the game, the animation are synchronized over the network. It's so cool. Okay, now that we have hands animation working, I want to jump to the next part on how two players can interact with the same object. So first of all, I want to create a table where I will put a cube. So I will right click here in the hierarchy, go to 3D and click on cube. We can recenter the position of the cube here by setting the position to 0, 0, 0. Now I want to put this cube in front of the camera, so I will just drag it over there. And we can maybe increase also the Y value. And now we'll create a little cube over there. So I will do exactly the same. Right click, go to 3D object, cube, recenter the cube, maybe scale it down to an appropriate size and put it above the table like this. We can change its color to red by right clicking here in project, go to create material, call this one red and change here the albedo color to red. We can drag then the material on this new cube that we made. And so if you watch my video on how to make a VR game in Unity with Unity XR Toolkit, you know that if we want to grab this cube, we first need to add to the left hand controller and the right hand controller the XR Direct Interactor script and also a sphere collider, which we need to set to is trigger is true by clicking here. And we can also change the radius to 0.1 maybe, so we'll be able to grab the object that enters this sphere collider. So this was for the XR Direct Interactor. Now to grab this cube, we need to add first a rigid body and then add an XR Grab Interactable. Perfect. And now we can grab this cube. So for example, if I click on play, you can see that indeed I can grab the cube with both my hand and even throw it. Perfect. Here is the issues. For now, each player can interact with their cube in their own way, but they won't be able to see this cube move in their own game. So how can we make this cube synchronize over the network? And to answer this question, let's remember what we did in the last episode. We use Photon view with a Photon transform view to move the hand of the player and synchronize the position over the network. And we can do exactly the same here. So I will add here add component, Photon view, perfect. And now in the same way, instead of adding Photon transform view, I'm going to add Photon rigid body view, which will be a bit the same as the Photon transform view, but here we'll use the velocity and the angular velocity to move the player, which will be better in our case as we are doing this when we are moving this object with the XR grab interactable script. So as you can see, we can click here on enable teleport for large distance, and we can change the threshold for teleporting over there. In my case, I will leave it to 3. I will click here also on synchronize angular velocity, and therefore this Photon rigid body view will synchronize both the velocity and the angular velocity of this game object among all of the client of the server. Perfect. So now let's save our scene and build our game. Okay, so as you can see, we have one instance of the game over there, which I'm currently controlling. And now we will see if I move the cube in this instance, if it will move in the other instance, so in the Unity editor. And so here you go. As you can see, it is working with a bit of lag, but it's fine. But if I move the cube in one instance, it moves in the second instance. Perfect. But we still have one big issue. So it worked for the first player interacting with the cube. But now if I go here in the Unity editor, we can even maximize the window over there. And that I try to grab with this instance the cube, you can see that it is not working and that I was not able to grab the cube. But why is that? The reason is that to move the cube, we need to be the owner of the cube over the network. And so it worked with the first client because he was the first one to grab the cube. But when I tried to grab it with the second client, it didn't work because I was not the owner. So now the big problem is to change the ownership of the cube when we grab the cube. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. First, we need to go to Photon view here, and as you can see, we have ownership, and we can change the ownership transfer to fix, take over, and request. And so if we want to take over the ownership directly and not wait for the request, we can click here on take over. Perfect. Now to change the ownership of this cube when we start to grab it, we need to change here the XR grab interactable. So to do so, let's right click on it, click on remove component, and we will add our own grab component. By clicking here on add component, we can name it XR grab network interactable. Now in this script, I will write here at the top using Unity engine.xr.interaction.toolkit. Then we want to override not mono behavior, but XR grab interactable. And so by doing this, we have now inside the script all of what is inside the XR grab interactable, but we will be able to override some of its function. So for example, if I go below here and that I write override, you can see that I can override all of these functions. So in my case, I want to override on select enter. Next, I want to add at the top using photon.pun. We'll create a new variable, which will be private and of type photon view, which I will name also photon view. We can access this variable at the start of the game with photon view equals get component of type photon view. And now in the onSelect enter, before we grab the object, we also want to change the ownership of this object. So to do so, it's really simple. We just need to do photon view dot request ownership. And what this does is request the ownership with the current local player. And so now let's save our script and see if it works. Okay, so let's see if we can grab the cube in this instance of the game. So if I reach my arm, you can see that yes, I'm able to grab the end and that it's moving in both of the client of the server. And now if we release it, and that we try to grab it in the second one, I will reach it with my arm. And as you can see, it works. We are able to grab it with the other player too, now that we have transferred the ownership of the cube. Perfect. And there you go. As you can see, we have now seen the basics of interacting with an object with multiple players. And so this tutorial is not over. I want to cover also another thing that you guys asked. It is how to add voice in multiplayer. And so let me show you how you can speak to the other player in the game using Photon voice. To add Photon voice in your game, you need to go to the asset store. We can search for Photon voice. And we want to download this one, Photon voice 2, which is free. I will now click on import to import it on my project. We can then click on import. Okay, so the Photon voice 2 asset is in our project. Now, let me show you how we can set it up really quickly. So if we go to Windows, Photon Unity Networking, and ILAS server settings, you can now see that we have the app ID voice showing here, but it is empty at this moment, and it's because we need to fill it up like we did for the app ID real-time of Photon. So to do so, let's go in the Photon dashboard that I shown in the previous episode, and we want to create a new app by clicking here. The type will be Photon voice. We can call it VR multiplayer voice. You can give here any name that you want, obviously, and then click on create. And now what's left for us to do is to copy the app ID over there in our game. So I will go back to the Unity and go here in app ID voice and copy the ID that we had. Okay, now that we have the app ID, we want to set up the network for the voice. And to do so, I'm going to right click in the hierarchy and click on create empty. We can, as always, recenter the position to 0, 0, 0. I will rename this game object network voice. Click on add component and search for Photon voice network. Perfect. And as you can see, this creates the Photon voice network component. Make sure here that the auto connect and join is enabled. Here for the tree log level, you might want to set it to error on all of them, because otherwise it will give a lot of information in the console windows, which we don't want. Okay, so next, as you can see, we need a primary recorder for our Photon voice network. So I will click once again on add component, search for recorder, and add it to this game object. Here, make sure that you click on transmit enable true. And we can then drag the recorder in the Photon voice network. Okay, basically that's it for setting the Photon voice network. Now what we need to do is create a speaker in each one of our network player. So to do so, I will go here in resources, network player, and double click on it. Now on the network player component, I want to add a Photon voice view. It's basically the same as the Photon view, but for the voice. We can change the log level to error, as always. Here for the recorder in use, we don't have to create a new one. We can just click here on use primary recorder to use the primary recorder that we already made in the network voice game object. But what we need to create is a speaker, as you can see here. So I will go in the network player, right click and click on create empty and call this one speaker. Perfect. And I will add as a component the speaker component. And as you can see, this automatically creates an audio source as well as a speaker component. Now, one interesting thing to do in VR for the speaker is to make the sound specialized. which means that if the player is on your right, you will hear it from the right headphone, and if he is on the left, you will hear him speak on the left speaker. And so this is really interesting in VR to create a sense of real presence. So to do so, we can just go in the audio source of the speaker and drag the spatial blend to 3D, like so. We can even maybe reduce here the max distance to 30 and increase the min distance to 10. There you go. And finally, don't forget to drag the speaker in the speaker variable of the Photon voice view. Perfect. And there you go. Now we can go back to our scene. And if we click on play, you can see a little mistake here. We have no audio listener in the scene. And so this is something that I also forgot to make in the previous video, which is add an audio listener to the XR rig. So I will go here in XR rig, camera offset, and click on the main camera. And we want to add the audio listener on this game object. And so the audio listener makes it possible to, well, listen to an audio. And so let's click on build and run once again. And there you go. So as you can see, I have a certain delay in my voice, which is created because I have two applications using Photon voice and they are sending the same voice to each other. So that is why I'm able to hear my own self. But it also means that it is working. We have now Photon voice working in our project, which means that our player will be able to speak to each other over the network. Isn't that great? And basically that's it. Thank you for watching. We've learned a lot on this tutorial. So how to synchronize the end position, how to interact with the same object, and how to speak to each other using the network. I hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. It really helps a lot to promote it here on YouTube. And if you want to see me make a game using this network setup, come check out my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.